Welcome, everybody. How's the audio? Ooh, special treat for tonight in celebration of 5.5K. I'm going to give you a full blown lecture, university lecture on ethics. And this is a really cool topic. We're going to consider moral skepticism and the arguments against objective morality, objectivism, and objective morals. We'll go over 11 of those arguments and then critique those. And obviously these are going to be arguments from subjectivism and relativism. And I've got some PowerPoint slides for you, so it's going to be a fun night. And let's see how many people we have. 29. Can't we get some more people in? Go tell your friends. Come on in. Free lecture. And I'll actually be going through the fundamentals of ethics. This is the Rush Schaefer Lando that I use in my ethics class. And I think this is a great topic. It's a timely topic. And you will learn what are the common 11 arguments that you might hear against objectivism and moral objectivity. And then you'll get to learn how those arguments don't work. And again, we're not going to straw man them, we'll steel man them, and then go through the very best that they have and deconstruct those. So welcome, everybody. Good. Up to 30. I saw 34. I dropped 3. Somebody must have heard about ethics and said, I didn't want anything to do with ethics. Okay, how are you all? Good? Yeah, let's get started. So let's just kind of define real quick ethical objectivism. Ethical objectivism is the view that there are some objective moral standards. That's the view that regardless of what I may feel or think, there is something independent of me, moral rules that apply to me and all as a standard across the board, even if you don't believe that. That's what objectivism is. And even if that doesn't make you happy or satisfy your desires, doesn't matter. It's objective. It's independent. Now, a lot of people don't like to hear that. They might fall in the camp of what we call moral skepticism. That's the view, well, first off, that objectivism's false, that ethical objectivism's false. In other words, they're going to state, a moral skeptic is, there are no objective moral rules, and there's no objective moral truths. That's a contradictory position to moral and ethical objectivism. What does that mean? They both can't be right. And if one is false, then the other one's true. If we can show that that's false, then the other one's true, and vice versa. Okay, let's go through and see what are the best arguments that moral skeptics have. And can objectivists defend themselves? Can they critique those arguments? Because if they do, moral objectivists can show that your arguments fail, then again, either moral skepticism and its subspecies of relativism and subjectivism are true, or objectivism is true. And if subjectivism and relativism, i.e. moral skepticism, is false, then by default, moral objectivism is true. So shall we begin? And if you don't mind, if you haven't already, hit that like button. If you're not a subscriber, subscribe and consider supporting me either through the super chats here, which you can put in through the Streamlabs. That's the best way because YouTube will take a percentage. There you go. Or consider me supporting me through Patreon or PayPal. I provided that in the description for the video here. But without further ado, let us begin. Okay, this is taken from, again, chapter 21 of The Fundamental of Ethics. Here are the 11 arguments that we're going to consider. Number 1, the argument from absolutism. 2, argument against objective truths. 3, arguments from equal rights man. 4, argument from dogmatism. 5, argument from tolerance. 6, argument from cultural variation. 7, argument from disagreement. 8, the argument from atheism. 9, argument from categorical reasons. 10, motivational argument. And 11, argument from the scientific test of reality. Doesn't that sound amazing? Alex, I will take argument 1. Argument from absolutism for 500. Okay, let's begin. Shall we? Well, here's the argument from absolutism. And many people are going to claim that, hey man, if morality were objective, then moral rules would have to be absolute. And since they aren't, morality isn't objective after all. Okay, so that is the argument of, hey, look, objectivism requires absolutism. Now, what we'll do is we'll put these in to steel man rather than straw man in deductive syllogistic arguments. That's one in which the premises support the conclusion. And you know what? We'll make it even better. Let's make the structure a valid deductive syllogism, such that if those premises are true, the conclusion has to be true. It's impossible for it to be false. That'll be nice. If we set it up that way, then we can actually go through each premise and see which one's the problematic premise, which one isn't, which one would we attack, etc. So let's go through and put this into a valid deductive syllogism. Premise 1. If moral claims are objectively true, then moral rules are absolute. No moral rule is absolute. Therefore, no moral claims are objectively true. Okay, I'm just curious, and I'll look in the chat. What premise would you think is problematic? Which one should we go after? Well, anybody? Look, let's just say that, just looking through the argument here, let's say somebody doesn't know. I don't know if there's any absolute moral rules. If there are, maybe killing and raping the innocent would be a good candidate. Okay, so suppose somebody doesn't want to go after number 2. So what I'm trying to offer is go after the most vulnerable position. Is it true? So suppose somebody were skeptical about premise 2. I don't know. Where would you go? Premise 1. Premise 1 tells us that when it comes to morality, being objective and being absolute go hand in hand. Is that true? Well, maybe we should define what objective versus absolute is. Objective has to do with the status of morals and moral rules. That means it's true independent of your desires, it's true independent of your beliefs, etc. Absolute means the degree or stringency of which that rule is applied. So, for example, you might have a moral rule that forbids lying, and it's objective. But it may not be absolute. In some cases, morality would dictate that you need to lie. We see this in St. Basil, even. Or the case you're hiding a certain group of people. Okay, the other one would be, I'm trying to think of another example. Here the author talks about God could exist and creates and reveals the moral law. Well, then the moral law would be objective. But God might have circumstances, allow for certain circumstances, maybe unusual cases, to break that moral law, or how that's to apply. So it doesn't follow premise one, and if we look back to that, if moral claims are objectively true, then moral rules are absolute. No, that doesn't follow. And if one is not true, then it doesn't follow that moral claims are not objectively true. Again, the objectivity of moral rules has to do with their status, with whether they are correct independent of our opinions or beliefs about them. The absoluteness of moral rules has to do with their stringency, with whether it is ever okay to break them, how it's applied, at what level. And look, there's no direct connection between matters of status and stringency. Those are two different categories. This is clear when it comes to natural laws. Various biological and psychological laws admit of exceptions. And so they're not absolute, but they're objective, correct? Okay. So, go for the easy kill. Number one, premise one. Now, probably not go with number two, because that, if you say there are, then you've got to make another argument, because premise two is what's actually in question. Okay, shall we go on to argument two? How are we doing? Let me look at what's going on in the chat. Any questions so far? Don't forget to send those super chats for questions, your support. We have the telephone callers waiting for your call. It's through charitable contributions like yourself that makes our public access ethics TV and philosophy vision possible. I'm kidding, but no, I'm not. It's what actually makes it possible. Okay, let us return, and I'll come back to, let's see if you have, looks like you guys are having your own arguments in in the chat. Okay, let me just see if anybody sent any super chats real quick, and then we'll move on to, don't forget to subscribe. Again, hit that like. Do we have any? No, we don't. So we are going to back to the PowerPoint. Argument against objective truths. Now see how they ordered this? Okay, it's going to go from here to here. Okay, arguments against objective truth. Well, this is a popular thought. I'm sure all of you have heard this one. The claim that can be true only relative to individual perspectives. Subjectivism, relativism. Hey man, there are no objective truths at all on that position. So, forget about morality at this point. What about claims in logic, chemistry, history? Well, on this position, they can never be true either. Why? Because there are no objective truths. That would apply, obviously, to morality as well. If there's no objective truths in logic, chemistry, history, math, so it's no surprise that there's no objective morality. It's an illusion, man. Okay, well, let's put this again in an argument form. And notice there's only one premise here and a conclusion. Well, it's still an argument. They don't necessarily have to have two premises. An argument simply is a statement, i.e. a premise, being offered as support for a conclusion. So this qualifies as an argument. Premise 1, there are no objective truths. 2, therefore there are no objective moral truths. That is the argument that all truth is subjective, or arguments against objective truth. Now, the first thing you're going to note is that if that works, there's no special problem for morality. Moral skeptics who are presenting this sort of argument, trying to show that morality is in some way, I guess, second rate. That it fares poorly in contrast to the more precise disciplines such as mathematics and physics and chemistry. But by embracing that kind of global skepticism, this argument abandons that strategy. It's going beyond that. Where's the problem? There's only one premise. I've made this really easy for you. It's premise 1. Surprise, surprise. Okay, premise 1 is either true or false. If it's false, then the argument is self-defeating right away. Why? Because if it's false, then the contradictory of that, there are some objective truths. And I wish I could actually present for you the logical, you know what, maybe I'll pop it up because I think this is important. The square of opposition. Because I have a screen capture. I know it'll do that weird kind of thing, but I just want to show you how this works. It's important in logic. Logical square of opposition. And then I'll get an image up for you. Okay, let me share screen. Hopefully you can see that. So this is an A proposition in logic. It's a universal affirmative, all S or P. This is an E proposition, universal negative, no S is P. This is an I proposition, a particular affirmative, some S or P, and an O proposition, which is a particular negative, some S or not P. So notice that what we had, there are no objective truths. If this is true, i.e. subjectivism or relativism, then the contradictory, the I proposition, is false. Namely, objectivism. There are some objective moral truths. Or there are some things that are objective. However, if this is true, then this is false. and vice versa, right? If this is false, then that is true. So again, if we go back to our statement, premise 1, there are no objective truths, that is as we saw, let's go back, an E proposition. That's false. Then the I proposition is true. If this is false, then that means there are some objective truths and the argument crumbles. Where's your other way that you can go? What other option? Let's say it's true. Okay? The premise can't be true, though. If it is, then there would be at least one objective truth, premise 1. And if there's at least one objective truth, then premise 1 is false. Bam! No matter how we look at it, the premise is false and the argument is bad. So it falls directly. There's at least some objective truths. Perhaps none of them might be a moral one at this point. But this argument fails, and it shows there are at least some objective truths. And we can't use that argument, number 2, to support moral skepticism. 2 down. Let's go to the third one. Let's see if any of you have any questions. Is this fun? This is great, huh? Yes, Chase. Premise 1 is self-defeating. Self-stultifying, from the Latin stultus, to make yourself stupid. Okay. Hey, God bless you guys. Orthodox Praxis donates $5. Thank you for the lecture, Father Deacon. Well, thank you for your support. God's Real Y'all donated $10. At some point, you can walk us through one of your formal arguments that you've made, which has a lot of premises. I'm interested in how to build conclusions that stack up in a longer argument. Great stream. Thank you, God's Real Y'all. Yeah, the best one that I think to illustrate that I've done that is my argument for the proving the immaterialness of the immateriality of the mind. That I use all valid deductive arguments. I make them sound, and I stack them up in the way such that, I remember what a deductive argument is. You can't just disagree with the conclusion. A valid deductive argument means if the premises are true, the conclusion has to be true. You can't say, nuh-uh. You have to find, like we're doing now, what premise is false. Now, what I've done is, further down the line, as you talked, as you'd mentioned, God's Real Y'all, is that each premise of the antecedent syllogisms, sorry, not antecedent, the consequent syllogisms, the ones that are later on, each premise is the conclusion of the previous syllogism, valid syllogism. And if you say, well, I don't agree with that, well, those premises are the conclusion of the previous one, so on and so on. It goes all the way back to the very first syllogism that I make. That's, well, it's indisputable. I constructed the premises so that it's just definitionally true and it's not objectionable. So, but it's the way that I structured it. It's the type of mood and valid form that I've given that argument, those terms that I was able to actually go all the way down. Game's over. It's checkmate. It's syllogism 1. And so maybe I'll do another stream kind of going through the strategy of that, because people always say, well, look, hey, the materialist is going to reject that premise or conclusion. I'm like, of course they will, but they can't. Because they'd have to go to the previous argument, to the previous argument, to the previous argument. It's all at syllogism 1. That's the strategy I used. And so far it's worked. nobody's gotten out of it. Okay, so thank you for the super chats. Keep them coming. I really appreciate your support on that. And now let's turn to equal rights, man. Argument 3. Well, hey, look, you've heard it. Countless disputes and moral disputes that end on this conciliatory note, right? Well, hey, everyone has a right to their own opinion. You have your view and I have mine. Maybe we're both right. Okay, it's a familiar refrain. We laugh because it's familiar. And it's sometimes actually taken a step further in the following way. And this is the idea. Since everyone has a right to a moral opinion, no one's moral views are any better than anyone else's. And if everyone's moral opinions are on par with one another's, then there is no objective moral truth. Well, let's consider this argument. And let's put it, notice here, we have 4 premises. Call it the argument from equal rights, man. Legalize it, man. Legalize moral skepticism, man. Criminalize objective morality, man, for equal rights. That's what we're going to do. Argument 3. Premise 1. If everyone has an equal right to opinion, then all opinions are equally plausible. 2, everyone has an equal right to his or her moral opinions. 3, therefore, all moral opinions are equally plausible. So that's the conclusion that follows from there, and then we're going to use that. If all moral opinions are equally plausible, then ethical objectivism is false. 5, therefore, ethical objectivism is false. Okay. Who wants to step their game up? What premise are you going to go after? Well, let's make it easy. Let's illustrate the ones that we won't go after. So going back to the PowerPoint. 4 seems to be obviously true. It's a conditional. If all moral opinions are equally plausible, or equally true, well, clearly then ethical objectivism is false. Okay, no question about that. So we can rule out that as one. We're not going to attack that one. If moral standards are objectively correct, then some people's views are going to be far from the mark and others on the target. Number 2, everyone, man, has an equal right to his or her moral opinion, man. Okay, well, depends what you mean by everyone has an equal right. We need to qualify that. Everybody has a right to be wrong. But that doesn't mean that everybody's positions are equally plausible. In fact, I think we could retranslate premise 2 to be something like this. Everybody has a right not to be brainwashed. Right? You have a right to an opinion. Right? There's some freedom of respect. You could still be wrong. Okay? So we can hold on that. Probably everyone has, an equal right not to be brainwashed. But the argument is going to be a failure even if number 2 is true. What premise do we go after, guys and gals, lads and lassies? Let's see what you have to say. Chase is for premise 1 again. We also say exposing powerful lies says premise 1. And premise 1 it is. It's false. Okay, let's go back to the PowerPoint. If everyone has an equal right to opinion, then all opinions are equally plausible. No. Nothing at all follows from that. That because we have a right to our own opinions, nothing follows about the plausibility of those opinions. The author, Russ Schaefer-Lando, uses this example. I was once walking through a forest with a friend who knows a lot about trees. I do not. I suggested that one I was looking at was an ash. It wasn't. He knew it was a larch. Our views were not equally plausible, even though I had as much right to my opinion as he did. And great example, and there's countless examples of that. Just to illustrate, again, you have a right to an opinion. It doesn't follow that, therefore, from that, that's true. So, premise one is false. And again, we can think of the same thing through economics, mathematics, basketball strategies, brewing beers. All these different things that we might not know about. We're entitled to our opinions, but that doesn't mean that our opinions, given that we're ignorant on that, is just as equally plausible as those who are experts in economics, mathematics, basketball, and beer brewing. Okay, let's move to 4, shall we? Okay, let's see. Argument from dogmatism. Dang. What do you think about this? I gotta read you out of the book. It's so funny the way he puts it. Pick any blowhard, tyrant, or political fanatic, and there's one thing they have in common. They're all ethical objectivists. Oh! These are folks who believe in moral truth with a capital T. What a bunch of idiots! Luckily for them, they discovered the truth with a capital T. Idiots! All they're trying to do is, well, they're kind of being nice. They're just trying to let you in on some of it. Well, sure, it might take a little bit of shouting, perhaps some coercion, maybe at times even some killing. Truth's pretty demanding. The argument from dogmatism. It's hilarious. Now, I'm not going to agree with the author. I brought this up too. I had an argument with somebody. Obviously, it was arguing for the truth of orthodoxy in an objective sense. And guess what I got? I got accused of this exact thing. You intolerant. I was called the N-word, the other N-word. Well, that's what the Reich thought. They were moral object. Look what that got. Look what that got. And so I actually corrected the gentleman, and I said, no, these people are not the tyrants and these political, fanatics and tyrannical regimes are not objectivists. So I don't even know where this thought comes from. They're concerned with power. They're the sophists, as Plato talks about. And what allows the sophists to take power is when a culture and society abandons objective truth, any moral standard. Because what's the court of appeals? There isn't any court of appeals. So if everybody's truth is conditioned and defined by themselves, there's nothing to argue. All that happens is might makes right. You pave the way for the tyrant to come in. So I would say he's incorrect, but it is kind of funny that he's able to identify that people actually think that way. Okay, how are you guys doing in the chat? All right. Well, you know what? Yes. Exposing Powerful Lies asks, can Henley and I become mods? What say we, everybody? Add moderator. Bam. Henley, where are you? I can't find you. It's moving so fast. We got 51 viewers. Thank you so much. You are making my Saturday night. Let me try to find you, Henley, among all the names. What if I just type in Henley and then okay, Henley writes something, so oh, here you are. Okay, you are mod. 2 mods added tonight. That is fantastic. Don't forget to support me on Streamlabs. Okay. Let's go through, let's pop up the PowerPoint. And we'll construct in the following valid deductive syllogism. Premise 1, if there are objective moral standards, then this makes dogmatism acceptable. 2, dogmatism is unacceptable, therefore there are no objective moral standards. Now, what do you mean by dogmatism? Well, the false etymology is that, and remember, always beware of false etymologies. Well, you know, it's sort of like a dog. They can't give up their ideas, just like the dog can't get. No, that's a false etymology. So let's just say, for the sake of the argument, dogmatism is a poor character trait, being unreasonably closed-minded. I think that's a good qualification, because oftentimes it's good to be closed-minded, to bad things, right? But notice if I qualify unreasonably so. So in that case, there would be something like a vice, right? You should always be reasonable about thinking through the possibility of good things, let's say. So let's say they're not going to attack number 2, so obviously they're going to attack number 1. If there are objective moral standards, this makes dogmatism acceptable. But that's false. In itself, the claim that there are objective moral standards is just perfectly neutral about how broad-minded somebody should be. Really, ethical objectivism is this claim about the status of moral claims. It doesn't tell you what is and is not morally acceptable. All it says is that the correct moral code, whatever it happens to be, is objectively true. So I'm giving you a modest proposal. Of course, we can make, deeper, more profound arguments. But at the bare minimum, just stay with that. Well, wait a minute. Ethical objectivism has nothing to do with dogmatism, because it's not even in the category of saying whether you should accept something or not. It's just making a claim about the status of morals and truths being independent of your beliefs or desires. That has nothing to do with dogmatism, so it doesn't work. But if we go back, look, we can say more. If moral truth is not of our own making, well, it may not always be easy to discover, right? Because we don't make it. That fact should encourage us to actually be more humble rather than arrogant and closed-minded, right? The proper outlook of people in different disciplines, whether it be an astronomer, geologist, I almost said astrologer, astronomer, astrologer, a geomancer, an astrologer, and an alchemist all walk into a bar. No, the examples are astronomer, geologist, and chemist. And they don't walk into a bar. We're talking about, they're filled with wonder, a recognition of one's intellectual limitations that drives them through kind of humility. An appreciation that no matter how smart you might be, you'll never get it all. There's always a kind of fallibilism with that. Okay? Even though, what? You're pursuing an objective truth. So again, to succeed in any intellectual discipline, I would argue, requires humility, not the dogmatism. So it reverses on that. And that would be the case with ethics too. Okay, the subjects and truths of ethics being objective, then the author argues we should be open-minded about moral matters. And it's perfectly consistent to say the answers to some questions are objectively true, even though you're not sure what those answers are. Why? Because you're making a claim about the status. Okay, I think that's pretty good. So ethical objectivism, in conclusion, is not committed to saying that moral wisdom is easy to get. In fact, objectivism makes such wisdom harder to come by than its competitors do, i.e. subjectivists and relativists, right? It's super easy. Just you define whatever you want. Speak your truth, man. Super easy. In fact, what the author's saying is that sounds like the prideful position. Objectivism seems like a more humble position, precisely because objectivists deny individuals or societies get the final word about what makes something true. So again, the first premise is mistaken. Okay, you want to go to number 5? How are we doing? Do we have any questions or super chats? Let us look and contemplate the mysteriousness of subscribers and super chats in my Streamlabs dashboard. Okay, what do we have? Oh, that's so sad. No new contributions. Well, there's still time. But as Father Seraphim Rose says, it's later than you think. And with that, let's turn to argument 5. The argument from tolerance. In other words, moral objectivity supports intolerance. Ugh. Whee! Okay. Very popular, especially these days. A popular reason for rejecting ethical objectivism. Why? Because we want to be a multicultural, tolerant, equitable society, right? That's an open society, man. But many think that value that kind of idea, think that, well, hey, tolerance is going to be threatened if moral standards were objectively correct. If some moral codes are better than others, then maybe some cultures are better than others. And if that's true, what's to stop those from the upper hand lording it over those who embrace a faulty code of conduct? Yep, you've heard it. In the schools, on the TV, Those critics say the best way to support tolerance is to what? Assume all moral views are just as good as any other. And if that were so, hey, then nobody would be in a position to suppress the lifestyles of, well, those who march to the beat of a different drum. We're just all going to have to agree to disagree. Doesn't that sound wonderful? A tolerant, more equitable, multicultural society in which, hey, everybody's views are valid, and if you disagree with me, you're going to jail or hell. Okay. So we need to support tolerance. Okay, let's put it in a syllogism for these tolerant, equitable, multicultural folks that just, they want the best for everybody, don't they? Premise 1, tolerance is valuable only if moral views of different people are equally plausible. Premise 2, if ethical objectivism is true, then the moral views of different people are not equally plausible. Therefore, 3, not all moral views are equally plausible. Okay, let's look at number 1. Tolerance is valuable only if the moral views of different people are equally plausible. Well, that's an interesting. What do you guys think about that? Those who favor tolerance tend to regard its value as universal. That's kind of what it's saying. So if it's valuable if and only if moral views of different people are equally plausible. So that's a conditional. That doesn't say that you believe that it's true. It's just saying if it is valuable, then the moral views of different people are equally plausible. I'd say, yeah, okay. I'll grant that. That's just to say that people think tolerance have a value, think the value is universal good, and everyone in society, and this especially to areas plagued by intolerance, since intolerance is needed most just when it's least enjoyed. Yet, if individuals have the final word on what morality is and what is morally right, then those who are fundamentally intolerant at their core in their deepest beliefs are making no mistake. The same goes for societies, right? All right, so we're looking at premise 2. I believe we're going into. So we're not going to attack premise 1. If ethical objectivism is true, then the moral views of different people are not equally plausible. But that seemed to be true as well. So what do we say? Back to 1? So the rejection, it's self-defeating. To be tolerant, you have to be tolerant of what? Intolerance. So the rejection of tolerance is as plausible as your endorsement of it. So if tolerance, so I think it's 1 that's the problem, right? And there could be an equivocation on what tolerant means. What do you think? Those who think, he says, tolerance is very valuable will want to say tolerance is morally required even of those people in societies that despise it. Such a view is perfectly compatible with ethical objectivism. So, what do you guys think? What say you? Let's look at the chats. Man, it's going by so fast, or I need to catch up. Okay, so he's just making an argument. And by the way, let me go back again to what I was saying about tolerance. I think there's an equivocation there. Tolerance, to tolerate, usually implies I'm dealing with something that's bad or wrong. So I find that interesting that people are like, we just got to tolerate all positions if that means that therefore all positions are equally plausible. Well, wait a minute. Tolerance means I don't think they're equally valuable, but I'm going to tolerate it at some level. So somehow this word's got to change over the course of history to, rather than admitting, I don't agree and I think the position's bad, I'm not accepting that all people's views are equally plausible, but I'll deal with it, I'll tolerate it, to toleration means they're all equally plausible. That's what I would actually attack. So I wouldn't agree with premise one. Tolerance is valuable only if all moral views of different people are equally plausible. So I would deny that based on that's not the actual meaning of tolerance, and that doesn't follow. I still think at some level, and remember, tolerance doesn't mean tolerating everything. It means I think stuff's wrong and perhaps even immoral, but I might not be willing to lock you up in a camp or something like a FEMA camp, or do an MK Ultra Clockwork Orange experiment on you. Now there might be times that I might think that's necessary, that I'm going to be intolerant of like these bad destructive ideas. But all I want to show is that premise one is not true because it departs from the very meaning of tolerance. What do you guys think? What are you saying in the chats? And also, even though it's not in that argument too, I made a joke of it, those who preach tolerance are the most intolerant people. All you have to do is bring up Orange Man and watch them flip their, not that I'm an Orange Man supporter, but you get the idea. Watch them flip their lid and put you in, or that you're not going to get the jab. And watch how they move from tolerance to intolerance. Yeah, Vaclav donated $5 and another $5. Thanks for the stream. Can you please, Christopher Walken. Christopher Walken. Oh, thanks, guys. Whoa, oh, wow, $5. Whoa, making Walken so happy. You know, Gandhi once said, tolerance, Walken. I'm a bit rusty on it, but there you go. Wow. Whoa. $5. Wow. How's that? Good? Okay. Yeah, this is hilarious. My body, my choice. Tell people if they ever bring that up. Literally made up fantasy. You will never find that as a principle anywhere. Anywhere in history. It's literally just made up. There's no law. In fact, just the opposite. Guess what law does? It actually tells you what you can and cannot do with your body. So what a dumb argument. My body and my choice. No, law tells you exactly what you can do with your body, and you subscribe to that every day. And literally, my body, my choice is a made-up fiction. Pure tard. Yeah. So you can give him Father Deacon Ananias's argument, man. You just made that up, and nobody cares what you have to say about that anyways. there's no even truth value or semantic meaning to what you just said, and everybody in this room is that much dumber because of it. Okay. PowerPoint. Cultural variation. Wow. Moral objectivity cannot allow for legitimate cultural variation. And remember, we live in a more equitable society. Multiculturalism, guys. Isn't that great? If there are no objective moral standards, well, no, let me put it this way, let me rewind. If there are moral objective standards, then they will apply to everyone in every society. Let's give an example. It's objectively wrong to slaughter people just for fun. Then it's wrong to do this everywhere, not just in my society, but yours. Yeah, and somebody might say, yeah, it sounds plausible, but it raises some worries for me. So it does seem that there can be legitimate cultural variation in what morally is required or forbidden. I think we could all admit that. And the example here is hilarious. I never offered my prospective in-laws any cattle before I proposed to my wife. Or maybe you did. I didn't. Okay. But if I was in the Sudan and I failed to do that, I would have probably been acting immorally. Feeding one's children from a garbage can is immoral here in the town that I live in. Probably, maybe the town you live in. It's probably illegal too. But in certain slums throughout the world, that's acceptable. This one's hilarious. Showing up at school or work naked would be a terrible sin in many New England communities. Not New England, but in a nudist colony, wait a minute. There's schools and nudist colonies now? What does the world come to? That I would argue, yeah, I don't care what nudist colonies do. Like, they're just objectively condemned as soon as they form a society like that. I don't care what you're doing in there. School, you're wrong, right? You're always wrong if you're naked. Let's put it that way. That's got to be an objective rule. Okay, all of that, the author's just saying, look, he's just trying to give a series of examples in which there's probably some cultural variation. However, if ethical objectivism is true, then all moral standards, all apply universally to everyone in every society. But two, we just saw some moral standards do not apply universally, but only in certain cultural and social contexts and not in others. I would have used the example of Amazonian tribes or something like that running around naked. Like, I guess that's allowed. There's some cultural variation. But it wouldn't be accepted in other societies. Anyways, whatever you got to plug in to illustrate number 2, which I think is uncontroversial. Therefore, the conclusion, ethical objectivism is false. So clearly, it's premise 1 that we want to attack. And this is going to be the same kind of thing that I brought up before. There's a distinction between status of moral rules and them being absolute or universal. That has to do with the stringency. So, or how it's applied. Let's put it that way. Because notice what number 1's saying. If objectivism is true, objectivism is status, meaning that things are true independent of you. It doesn't follow then that all moral standards apply universally to everyone in every society in the same way. correct? It may be a moral duty to show respect to loved ones. Okay, no matter who you are or where you come from. And that might be universal. But the way that you fulfill that might be different for different societies. Okay, in Sudan, the tribes take it as a sign of disrespect if a suitor does not provide cattle as a dowry, correct? In our society, it'd be the other way around. We have other ways of conveying such respect. So notice that has nothing to do with ethical objectivism. It's how the general rule that's objective would be applied in different situations. Are all objective rules applied equally across the board in every particular situation? No. So premise 1 does not follow. To the reference of moral principles apply across the board to everyone everywhere. Okay, so they may be objectively correct, but even sometimes they support different specific moral duties in various contexts, in different cultural societies, and even within our society. So number 1 is false. So let's move to, where are we, 7? Arguments from disagreement. I disagree. Let's see if we have any more super chats there. I will take them. Yes! Robot G, $5. What is your main argument for objective morality? Again, going back to the beginning, you have 3 options, basically. You have moral nihilism, and that is, there are no moral facts out there. So there's nothing true or false to be said. That's one way to go. The other way is moral skepticism, which is going to break down into, which is the contradictory position. Both those are contradictories. Moral nihilism and moral skepticism of objectivism. In other words, you can't have objectivism be true and one of these be true. So, if moral nihilism is false, I think we could show that I have a whole lecture on that itself. Then what are the 2 candidates? Moral skepticism, of which the species is subjectivism and relativism, and moral objectivism. If moral skepticism is self-defeating and has no arguments and could not have any arguments, which is what we're going through, I'm giving them the very best, but in the end, none of the arguments follow, and in fact, to actually suggest that this is true, right, means that this is false. There are no objective moral truths. But is that true? Then there's at least one, and this is false. Therefore, by process of elimination, moral objectivism is true. So that would be, thank you, Robot G, who donated $5. I hope that helps. Okay, moral disagreement undermines moral objectivity. Okay, what say we? Consider a classical argument against moral objectivity. Takes its cue from simple observation. There's a lot of more disagreement in ethics than there is in science, boys. And there is a ready explanation for this. Scientists are trying to understand the nature of objective reality, right? I go over this all the time. You might notice it was in my first lecture on Introduction to Philosophy, the distinctions between philosophy and science. And this comes in. And psychologically, people think that that's actually true. There's not the same disagreements in science. Why? Because they're aimed at objectivity. But when it comes to morality, we're merely expressing our own personal opinions, man. Ones that have been shaped by the time and place in which we've been raised, is what people think. That's why we're all different. We all come from different strokes for different folks. And different upbringings makes different moral outlooks. But science, across the world over, can agree on a wide set of truths, no matter their religious or cultural backgrounds. So goes the argument. Well, let's put it into, for them, a valid argument. Number one, if well-informed, open-minded, rational people persistently disagree about some claim, then that claim cannot be objectively true. Two, well-informed, open-minded, rational people persistently disagree about moral claims. Therefore, no moral claim can be objectively true. Well, number two is obviously true. There are well-informed, open-minded people. Perhaps they're rational even. But they disagree about things and moral claims. So, where do we go? Now, the author thinks that premise 2 might be too strong. He thinks maybe there's some. So notice the reason why he thinks it's too strong is because all moral claims. You see that? That is a strong. I don't know if that's the case. All moral claims? Perhaps some. Okay. What is clearly true is that for any moral claim, even if one you find to be just obvious, there's probably going to be someone else who thinks it's false. I could put it that way. That's fine. All right, but that doesn't show that premise 2 is true, since such people may not be well-informed or open-minded or rational. So what he's saying is, look, you can attack 2. But let's go to number 1 and just assume for the moment premise 2 is true. So we could attack that if we wanted to. But let's go for the most vulnerable. Number 1's the most vulnerable because it's patently false. There are counter examples galore. This is interesting. He uses science here. Brilliant physicists disagree about whether the fundamental elements of matter are subatomic strings. Eminent archaeologists disagree about how to interpret the remains discovered in ancient sites. And finest philosophers disagree about all kinds of different stuff. Yet there are objective truths in all of those. There are objective truths about the fundamental nature of the physical world, about the nature of various prehistoric tribes, about various philosophical things. Gaining knowledge of those truths, well, it's hard, right? And maybe even sometimes it's impossible. I don't know. It depends. But our beliefs on these matters must answer to objective reality. Our views don't make physical or archaeological or philosophical claims true. The facts are what they are. They're independent of what we think of them. So, we already have deep doubt and concern about premise 1. You know, just because somebody's informed, open-minded, and rational disagree doesn't mean something can't be. That doesn't follow. So, deep disagreement even among the best minds on those counterexamples is enough to show that premise 1 is not true. Okay. Ooh, we're getting interesting. 8. Let's go to 8. The argument from atheism. Okay, so I realize the author of this is not a theist. There's like certain giveaways. He tries to hide it, but will obviously I'm going to critique the author's critique of various things in this. Yes, Philip donates $5. Could you give an orthodox view on the youthful dilemma? Okay, so the idea is that it's like kind of divine command theory that is something morally good because God commands it, or does God command it because it's morally good? The two horns of the dilemma is the first one is then it seems that it makes morality arbitrary. God could say like rape's good and therefore it would be good simply because he commands it. It's arbitrary, and that seems problematic. However, if God commands you to love your neighbor and not murder and kill and rape, that's because it's something good independent of what he says. So he's not the author of morality. And so there is the dilemma. Now, I would say that it's a false dilemma. Again, God doesn't act against his nature. He's not going to do contradictory things. So what makes something good is because it's in accordance with nature. And if we just think in terms of functionally, like why is that a good orange tree or something like that? Because it's developing teleologically towards its end, its reality that was created by God. So if God creates all of reality, then it establishes exactly what's good. You can't, and so you can't have God creating things like rape being good anymore that you could. God could create a rock bigger than he can lift. It's an illogic, right? Why? Because there's an aspect of bad and rape. There's a privation, a lack of being, which goes very against the notion of God creating being, and in him everything moves and has its being and is sustained. So it's out of God's nature. God is goodness. He doesn't look to anything outside of himself. But in the created world coming from his goodness, he creates the world and he looks upon it and he says it is good. That's what defines it. It's nothing independent from him. It stems from his very being. And he commands it to be. And therefore, it's not simply an arbitrary command, but it has to do with the very nature of his goodness that he possesses and the nature of being and how that plays out in the world. So you could just say that's a false dichotomy. So thank you, Philip. Andre V. Hey, Father Deacon sends $3. Thank you. Do you think one can be an atheist agnostic yet still be a moral objectivist? What do you think? Now, somebody could affirm that. I've seen atheists and agnostic, like Kantians. They could be an atheist. Affirm that. I just don't think they can justify that. And we'll see this with this argument. I watch YouTube, donated $5. Thank you, I watch YouTube, donated $5. I'd love to see a stream or video sometime about the nonsense in physics, right? I know quantum mechanics, special relativity from a logical point of view. Yeah, great. So thank you for your super chats. Keep them coming. This is fantastic. Lovely night. And let's go to the argument from atheism. Premise 1. Morality can be objective only if God exists. The atheist is going to say God does not exist, therefore morality cannot be objective. Okay, the author says, I'm not going to touch number 2. And he thinks premise 1 is false. I counter his proposal. Now, what he says, let me just give you the argument and then that he gives, and then I'll go through my critique of Rush Schaefer Lando. So the idea is, if premise 1 is true and objective morality really does depend on God, then moral skepticism is vindicated. Many people think premise 1 is true. They reason as follows. Moral laws, like other laws, must have an author. But if the laws are objective, then by definition no human being can be their author. So who is? He says 3 guesses. This reason has always been very popular. He thinks it's mistaken, but who cares? He's mistaken. He's wrong. He thinks the assumption rests on a faulty assumption. Laws require lawmakers. Ultimately, I'd say, yeah, that's right. His example, though, is begging the question, because he says, but if atheism is true, laws would not require lawmakers. Well, first of all, that begs the question. That's why he can't skirt premise 2. He's got to go, you've got to take a position on that. Okay. And simply because atheists admit that there's laws but don't believe in God, that doesn't prove anything. He says atheists believe there are objective laws of logic, physics, genetics, statistics, and so on, yet they don't believe God exists. Well, all I'm going to show you, they're precisely wrong in that way. It doesn't make any sense to be an atheist and talk about laws. And let me put it this way. This is why a transcendental argument for the existence of God is really good. Let me just do it real fast. There is nobody that's presuppositionally or ideologically neutral. The reasons that we believe that there's laws, that there's knowledge, that there's statistics, and so on, genetics, morality, are because of previous ideas and presuppositions. If those previous presuppositions are wrong, then we have no justification for believing and making inferences that logic is valid, that physics is what it is, etc. In fact, we may even hold to certain presuppositions and ideas that are self-defeating. We've already saw it in one argument. There are no objective truths. True or false? False, the argument's destroyed. True, the argument is destroyed. It becomes self-defeating. And likewise on the atheist position. Because ultimately, you roll it back in the analysis, you come to a disjunction, an either or. There's only 2 possibilities. And by process of elimination, like we did with moral nihilism and moral skepticism out, therefore objectivism, we do the same thing with it's either theism or atheism. Okay, well, what is theism? It's the belief that there's a personal, omnibenevolent, omniscient, loving God who creates the world on purpose. And the reason why, that there's uniformity in nature, that there's identity over time, that there's the laws of physics, that knowledge is possible, and that your mechanisms and the mechanisms of the world are such that causally it works, that you're capable of actually having true beliefs and being justified, is because God purposely intends for that. Okay? That makes sense. That means there's purposeful intention behind the universe if you're a theist. What's the opposite? An atheist. There is no purpose. So the opposite of purpose is accidentalism. And if I drive my car into the wall, like I always say, on purpose. If I don't do that, it's like, oh, I crashed into the wall on accident. So ultimately, one's epistemic principles and founding principles behind it all is an atheist is accidentalism. Now think about this. That's the ultimate explanation. That is their apophaticism. There is nothing more that can be said beyond that. It reduces down to accidentalism if you're an atheist. What does it mean then to say that accidental laws of physics, accidental statistics, accidental genetics, accidental knowledge, just taking the laws of physics, it precludes accident? It's a necessary relationship. What does it mean, accidental knowledge? Knowledge precludes that you arrive at true beliefs by accident. Right? All these things are oxymoron. In fact, that position and other positions that the atheist holds makes meaning, knowledge, law, genetics, statistics, mathematics impossible. It's a self-defeating position. And therefore, atheism's false, accidentalism's false, then theism must be true. And therefore, I've refuted the Oxford scholar Russ Schaefer Landau. Laws do require lawmakers because the antithesis of that is self-defeating. What do you think? So that was pretty easy. And again, you can check out the stream that I did this morning with Lewis, where I kind of go further in depth in transcendental arguments. But atheists, it's super easy to defeat, especially when you know kind of transcendental arguments, because every position that they take, they have no position for their position. They have no criteria for their justification criteria. And they hold to things just like the moral skeptic, relativist, subjectivist that's self-defeating. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't have accidental laws. You can't have accidental knowledge. Okay? You can't have unjustified justifications. Sorry. And so your position becomes an oxymoron and self-defeating. And there is no argument, there is no position that can say that God's a delusion. That how do you prove that? You have no standard for anything at that point. And at that point, my apologetic works is done. I've defended the faith. But our position, the Orthodox position, is the only position. Why? Because it's not an autonomous epistemology, right? Because all autonomous epistemology is starting from your own made-up principles. And watch what they always do. Just grant me all my principles and starting points without me having to justify them, and then I'll prove my point. They all do that. That is the hallmark of autonomous epistemology. The other one is a very different view. We're not in a position to know. I do not construct. I do not make up my axioms and pretend justifications that I don't ever have to justify. Just grant them to me, and I'll make my case and do my stuff. It's self-defeating, it's arbitrary, but the contrary theistic revelation, theonomous epistemology, admits the impossibility from man's pretended autonomy to be able to know or give criteria for their justification criteria or a coherent account of knowledge at all that isn't viciously circular, self-defeating, or arbitrary. But this story is very different. It gives an explanation through purposeful intention of all the things that I mentioned. So there's only one way to go, but you can always be stubborn and obstinate and resist that. Number 9. Argument from categorical reasons. Most people think that all moral duties come prepackaged with a special power. They automatically supply people with the reasons to obey them. That special power gives people reasons to obey them. It doesn't matter what we care about. If it's really your duty to repay the loan or help an aged grandparent, then you've got an excellent reason to do so. By the way, this is hearkening Immanuel Kant. Somebody had already brought this up with categorical imperatives, where Kant specifically defines stuff in terms of duties in his deontological ethics rather than kind of a consequentialism or a desire theory ethics or a hedonism. He removes all desires, all emotions, and put things in the realm of reason, categorical reasons. It's your duty. So then I don't have to actually, it doesn't matter what I feel or care about. It's my duty. And that's reason enough, because it is a reason. So the author says that's unusual. My reasons for writing this book, using the treadmill or listening to music, all depend on what matters to him, he says. Most reasons are like that. The reasons that come from morality, however, are not like that. They're categorical. They apply to us regardless of what we care about. Again, this was going to be the argument from categorical reasons. Premise 1. If there are objective moral duties, then there are categorical reasons to obey them. We just gave an example. But this group of people, the moral skeptics, think there are no categorical reasons. Therefore, there are no objective moral duties. And somehow, this argument's convinced some very smart philosophers. I don't know how that's possible. But for those of us that are objectivists, there's two lines of response here. Obviously, it's a logically valid argument. So we have to reject either premise 1 or premise 2. Yeah, some people are going to take premise 1. Those people are going to deny that objective moral duties must supply us with reasons for actions. Okay, I can see that. It might be that some people have no reason to do what morally requires them. Ah, interesting. Whether there are objective moral standards is one thing. Whether they apply or supply us with reasons to obey them is another one. Okay, touche, good point. The answer to the first question may be yes, even if the answer to the second is a disappointing no. Now, if that's correct, and I think there's probably reasons to think that it might be, then we'll have to abandon the old age hope of showing that everyone has a reason to be moral. That's the consequence of that. So there are some true things that he says about that, but that would be the consequence of, okay, why? Because objective moral duties are categorical reasons, and those are the reasons to obey them. The rules. However, I'm not sure if that mutually excludes other reasons. We'll have to see that. But let's take the other option. Okay, let's reject premise 2. And if we reject premise 2, we'll say that objective moral duties really do provide categorical reasons, and those reasons exist. Okay, fair enough. I think we could say that. There are obviously reasons to behave in certain ways. And I think this is more akin to our view. So we accept number 1. There are reasons to behave certain ways, even if our behavior doesn't benefit us or satisfy our desires. Because that's what I was thinking. The way to object to this, premise 1, is to come in with something called desire satisfaction theory. that that's a reason in itself. That's not a categorical reason, and therefore it doesn't follow that just because there's objective moral duties, there's always categorical and only categorical reasons to obey them. There might be desires need to be satisfied. But let's reject that. Let's say, no, okay, that reject the critique of that and accept number one and say, yeah, there's going to be reasons to do it even if it doesn't satisfy our desires or benefit us. Now, in order to do that, he says you have to reject the most popular view of reason. I don't care if it's the most popular. But the most popular view says you have a reason to do something if and only if it will promote your self-interest or get you what you care about. But that's just to go back to desire satisfaction theory, which has a huge host of problems because desire satisfaction theory states that all that matters for a good life is that your desires are satisfied. And there's all these counter objections. So he gives another example of the best way to criticize this popular view that you only have a reason to do something if and only if it promotes your self-interest or you get what you care about. Also, that's explicated in psychological or ethical egoism as well. And he's going to give this counterexample here. Suppose that you're hiking along a cliff path and notice a stranger who's absent-mindedly walking from the opposite direction. You see he's about to take a plunge from that wrong step. A plunge to his death. There's a reason to yell and alert him of the danger. And that reason applies to you even if you don't care a bit about the man or about the pats on the back that you will receive when the story gets out. There's something to be said on behalf of your warning. Something that favors it, that justifies it, that makes it a legitimate thing to do. Well, there are different ways of saying the same thing. There's an excellent reason for you to save the stranger's life, even if doing so won't make you any better off or get you anything that you care about. And there's a whole host of examples that we can think about that, again, even if every case it benefits you, that would simply just show that it's epiphenomenal. It's just baggage that comes with it. It doesn't show that that's the reason why you do it. And I think there's plenty of examples, again, that you can show that, theoretically, there would still be reasons to do even if it didn't, which is one example that he gives. So in short, those who believe that morality is objective, he thinks, either have to attack number 1 or 2. And guess what? Philosophers done both. I say, obviously, we could go with number 2. And then, therefore, the conclusion doesn't follow. All right, let's see. Wow, we've got some more. Atheist Intellectual donated $2. Thank you. Is God's nature good because it's good or because he commands it to be? You can just keep moving the question back with the rescue devices. Again, why not just deny the false dichotomy? Why is it opposed? Why is it an either or? Is God's nature good because it's good? Well, yeah, at some level, right, it boils down to tautologies. Is being because it's being? Yes. Right? So that's certainly true. But I would say the latter is false. God doesn't command his nature. He's not a causa sui, like all people in theology, regardless of the different sects, would agree, unless you're maybe Spinoza or something like that. But God doesn't cause himself to be. And commands are causes, therefore he would. So the first would be true. God's nature is good because it's good. You can't keep appealing to something. The buck has to stop somewhere, right? And in that sense, it becomes tautological. And tautology is necessary for all meaning anyways. And it's false, the statement, it's good because he commands me. Okay, so thank you, Atheist Intellectual, for $2. I appreciate that. David G donates $10. How would you respond to someone who says God cannot be objectively moral and benevolent because he commands Israelites to kill the innocent Canaanite babies in the Bible? I'd probably do a precept argument on, well, then you must, before getting into the nitty-gritty, obviously the person who's raising that question has a standard for something being bad or good. I want to know what that is, right? Just so that he even understands. And what you're going to find is they don't actually have a standard for that. And second of all, I would probably say that I'm not sure why that's problematic when God sustains all being and permits death anyways. So, especially if the Canaanite babies he knew were going to become evil. But I would just roll it back to why do you think that would be evil? What would be your... And again, there would be no critique of that position once you show them. They're not in a position to actually know what's good or evil or make a distinction. So thank you, David G. Atheist Intellectual donates $1. Sweet, dude. Why couldn't accidental universe create regularity and principle? Eternal energy always was, always in motion. Regularity, we have evidence for the universe to better infer. Well, where's the notion of what does regularity even mean? In fact, accidentalism, it's the inverse. And this is why I'll show you that it's incoherent to actually think that accident produces regularity. Accident can produce necessity. So if you even, and Aristotle made this argument, what does it mean? The word accident, it's a misuse of the word accident. Accident has its own meaning only in virtue of purpose. The same way that part cannot exist in its semantical context and its meaning without a reference to whole. What does part mean? A fraction of the whole. So you can't actually have the meaning of part if the meaning of whole doesn't exist. Why? Because it refers back to it. Another example, potency. You can't have the notion of something being potency without it being a potency towards something actual. So none of these words have a meaning that exists on their own. And likewise, with accident, Aristotle gives this example. What do we mean by accident? It's payday, and there's things that you need with the money. You've got to go to the grocery store. Let's say you got to get gas, and you got to pay your landlord. but you're taking that money with the intention, purposeful intention, to go get groceries, but by chance or accident, you run into your landlord. So the money that was purposely intended to go to pay for the groceries, by chance or accidentally goes to the landlord. Well, notice you can't explain there's no such thing as pure accident. Accident only has its meaning in virtue of intelligent, personal, purposeful intention towards goals. It just means in light of that, another goal happened that you weren't necessarily aiming at. And likewise, even in statistics, what is randomness? There's no such thing as pure randomness. Randomness are the plots off the intelligible function, the order. So the problem that the atheist has is they don't understand what the world or what accident actually means. Accident is derivative. Accident and chance are derivative from purposeful intention. The mistake that the atheist does is he puts that above as his ultimate principle without referencing purpose and intention, that being derived from that. And therefore it becomes self-defeating and a meaningless statement. So that's how I'd answer it. Great question, though. I'm always happy to. And again, all these things, energy, motion, you say evidence for the universe requires that you have a standard for evidence. And we're just going to show that you have no standard for evidence. Evidence is paradigm relative, and if your paradigm's incorrect, you're right, the evidence is incorrect. Thank you. Okay, let's go back to and do number 10. We're almost there, guys. Oh, I thought it was in the camera, but we're still on the PowerPoint, which is fine. I don't care. The motivational argument. Ask yourself a question, as we've asked many questions. If you sincerely judge an action to be your duty, aren't you automatically motivated? Well, maybe a little bit, at least, to do it. If you think a plan or policy is morally a good one, aren't you moved to some extent to help it along? If you answered yes, then you're going to support my patristicfaith.com. And you share our belief that moral judgments, that's the right thing to do to support patristicfaith.com, are motivated and are motivational by their very nature. Their essence is to move people to act, right? Yes. It's not just a coincidence of some kind, a minor miracle or moral judgments so reliable move us to act. They have that power because at the core, what they do is express the very things that cause us to act. Our desires, our cares, commitments, and emotions. When we judge that it not to be done, are concerned for those who might be harmed by it. Our moral judgments express our feelings, and our feelings are our basic motivations. That is why our moral judgments are so easily able to get us to act. Okay, I think that's right. Contrast this picture with another one. Beliefs, unlike moral judgments, they're not really in the business of getting us to act in certain ways. They're focused on stating facts, reporting truths, describing reality. If I believe that there is a computer monitor in front of me, and there is, 2 cats nearby, and a rug underneath my foot, I'm not to move to act in any way at all, am I? Those are beliefs. If I want to use the internet or pet my cats or vacuum my carpet, then these beliefs will help to direct my actions, but they won't motivate them. But the key here is that beliefs can only do this only by attaching themselves to my desires. Okay, fair enough. If I didn't want to use the internet, if I didn't want to pet my cats, and if I didn't want to vacuum my carpet, the beliefs about them wouldn't do anything. So I need belief and desire to get me, to motivate me. Now contrast that with a moral judgment. And we'll look at this argument. This is, guess what? Inspired by our good old friend David Hume. In constructing the following motivational argument. 1. Moral judgments are able all by themselves to motivate those who make them. Beliefs are never able to, all by themselves, to motivate those who hold them. Therefore, moral judgments are not beliefs. If moral judgments are not beliefs, then they can't be true, because only beliefs are true. Therefore, moral judgments can't be true. That's a more difficult argument. Okay? Unlike the previous 10 arguments, however, this one doesn't actually say that moral objectivism is false. If the conclusion, though, of the argument is correct, then moral judgments can't be true. And we'll have to make a further argument from there. If they can't be true, then they can't be objectively true. And if they can't be objectively true, then ethical objectivism is false. So all this all by itself won't do, but you would use premise 5 to construct an argument that ethical objectivism is false. Okay, so seems to me if moral judgments are not beliefs, then they can't be true, because only beliefs could be true. For example, what if moral judgments are just expressions, emotions, commitments, plans, orders, desires? Well, plans, orders, commitments, desires, and emotions are neither true or false. This goes back to another conversation, another lecture that I was giving from moral nihilism that called expressivists. So that they said, really, only beliefs are true and moral judgments are not beliefs, so there's nothing to be true. All moral judgments are expressions, emotions, commands, different stuff like that. And so you're just kind of grammatically deceived when you hear that torture is immoral or that slavery is evil. What they think, an expressivist, all that really means semantically is slavery, a disgust, or command. Don't do it. Doing something is not in the category of true or false. Somebody saying, I find tapioca pudding disgusting is not true or false. It's an expression. Okay, so if moral judgments are not beliefs, then that's kind of the way that you actually go. So it leaves us with the other two ways and options. You can try to undermine premise 1 or the second, and we could do both. Okay, and people have done both. People have actually criticized number 1 and accepted number 2, and vice versa. The people criticizing 1 have said that moral judgments are beliefs. Beliefs cannot motivate all by themselves. Therefore, moral judgments cannot motivate all by themselves. Moral judgments, like all beliefs, need, and here's where they go, a supplemental desire in order to move people to action. Now, those objectivists that take that line begin with the assumption it's possible that sincere moral judgments leave us entirely cold. Okay, that's possible. And then most people have moral concerns and want at least a little to be moral. So even though some might leave us completely, since most people have moral concerns and want to be moral judgments will motivate most people who make them. But some people just don't care about morality. So notice what they're going to say. Moral judgments are able all by themselves to motivate. Well, not for people who don't care about morality. They judge things right or wrong and yet are completely unmoved. And that shows that premise one is false. You can't make a universal claim like that if there's people who just don't care about morality and aren't moved. Moral judgments cannot move people all by themselves. That's one way to go. We could also accept one and reject two. Here we would say beliefs alone can motivate people to act. That's how we'd have to contradict that. This is say beliefs are never. Well, sometimes they can. Clearly, not just any belief could do that, but maybe some special types of belief. Well, not my belief that 3 + 3 = 6, or Peru's in South America, that's going to move me to do a dang thing. But how about, and this is what you get in ethics, evaluative beliefs. Beliefs that tell us what is good or bad. Okay, 3 + 3 = 6 is not telling me if something's good or bad or Peru's in South America. It's just a factual statement, and factual statements don't motivate me to do a dang thing. But beliefs about what is good and bad, right or wrong, they may, in some cases, and that's all I need, not in all cases, in some cases, to be the contradictory of premise 2, they may in some cases be able to get us to act all by themselves. And if they can, premise 2 is false. And guess what? Immanuel Kant is exactly one of those people who rejects premise 2. And the goodwill involves our reason, he thinks, those categorical reasons, the duties, and not our desires. So he actually rejects desire theory and emotions. Okay, and actually says there are certain types of beliefs about duties and categorical imperatives. So that's another way to go. So I suggest either attack 1 or 2. Both you can do. And shall we turn to our last one? And we'll end with this, and then I'll take any last super chats that you guys have to answer questions. This one is hilarious, and we've all heard it. Values have no place in a scientific world. Science. And this always goes back to this kind of Occam's razor. William of Occam, 13th century. Never multiply causes beyond what's necessary to explain. And in a naturalistic world, we can explain everything through science, through natural causes. So why do we need a causal overdetermination in violation of Occam's razor? Okay. So on that, let's, oh wait a minute, I'm still on 10. I need to switch to the last slide. If science cannot verify the existence of X, then the best evidence tells us that X doesn't exist. Science cannot verify the existence of objective moral values. 3, therefore the best evidence tells us that objective moral values don't exist. Now, obviously there's 2 ways to reply to this. Both premises seem problematic. well, if science cannot verify the existence of X, then the best evidence tells us that X does not exist. Well, that doesn't follow. It begs the question that science is the epistemic foundations, right? Empirical science is the epistemic foundations for everything and asserting the existence, and that the buck actually stops there. How do I know that? Well, think about this. What is science? And it's similar to this statement, and here's how we know that it's self-refuting. It's similar to the whatchamacallit, the logical positivists. That science has the final word on everything. Think about this. A claim, what is that saying? What is premise one? And I think premise two assumes it too, is saying a claim is true only if science can verify it. But that claim cannot be true. Why? Science can't verify it. That claim's not scientific. You can't test its truth by analyzing what you see, hear, or taste, or smell, or feel. You can't mathematically test it, i.e. the claim that a claim is true only if science can verify it. That science is the only thing that can verify the existence of thing. That claim is not a scientific claim. Right? It's self-defeating. And furthermore, it's self-defeating in the same way that the only thing that's true or meaningful are those things that can be empirically verified. The logical positivist position. That can't be empirically verified. So I would say, one, it's simply an assertion. Two, given the nature of science, science does not actually tell you about ontology. Science, when it's even done well, is the lowest form of reasoning. It's probabilistic, inductive. And that would only work if there's prior epistemic principles that would even ground that. A coherent metaphysics, an ontology, an epistemology. Science cannot be a starting point. Okay, it's begging the question. Well, just give me what all I want about what science is going to say, and then I can make my proof that if science can't verify something, it doesn't exist. So that's viciously circular. It's arbitrary. And again, it's self-defeating to actually then, you'd have to boil it down to saying that if science cannot verify something, what that really means is the claim is only true if science can verify it. Science can't verify the claim, so it's self-stultifying. Okay, other questions about... Oh, the last thing I wanted to say is, it's the naturalistic fallacy. It's a category mistake. Science is descriptive, at best, right? Assuming you have some type of critical realist view. It's attempting to make is statements. The atom is, the hydrogen has one electron, etc. That's not normative. That's not the category of normative. Ought it to be that way? There's a difference between a parent saying, You are picking up your room versus you ought to pick up your room. But ethics is concerned with the latter, the normative, and dealing with normative features. Those features that tell us how things ought to be, how we should behave. Okay? Science doesn't deal with that. Science, at the very best, attempts to describe how things are. If you're taking a critical realist or a naive realist view, if you take the other views of science that philosophers of science have, you don't even get there. But I'm not going to go into that. So just on that, a modest proposal, science has limits of what it can actually do. You know, if I grant you a critical realist or a naive realist position about science, all I'll get you is science describes. Even if you can pull that off. Morality prescribes. And so, going back to our argument, science cannot verify the existence of moral objective values. That was premise 2. That would be false. So what have we seen? I'll pull this up and then we'll end. Premise 1 is false. It's arbitrary. It's viciously circular. And it's self-defeating because ultimately it boils down to a claim is only true if science can verify it. And it's just historically not actually true either. It also depends on science cannot be the epistemic starting point. That if science even works when it's done well, it's going to depend on certain things and categories of the epistemology, the ontology, and metaphysics. And therefore it has bounds. And therefore science is not in a privileged epistemic position to verify the existence of things, such that 1 will be false. Number 2, category mistake. The naturalistic fallacy. You can't get an ought from an is. Science, if I even grant you a naive or critical realist position, would only describe, it would not tell you the normative features of prescription that morality deals with. Okay. And we conclude. We have seen 11 arguments, their very best ones that they can actually give. And we were able to critique each and every one of them. We steel-manned them. And we put them in valid deductive forms so that we could easily identify what was the problematic premise. And we did. And we showed multiple ways and multiple premises, methods of attack. And so again, if moral skepticism is self-defeating, because it claims there is no objective truths, which is objective truth, then moral objectivism must be true. And we end with that. Let me just see if you guys have any more super chats. Woo! Right at the 2-hour mark. Okay, Theodore, $5. Thought-provoking, informative stream. Love the slides. Yes. Again, we are celebrating my 5.5K, and we're going to do a lot more streams. I'm going to do a lot more stuff. I'm super excited, praise God, about the patristic faith and all the support and wonderful feedback and love, prayers that I've got from you all. My web designers and artists are working away hard. We actually do have the Patristic Faith website, patristicfaith.com. Yesterday I wrote up about what the project and ministry really is, so you can see that. The web designer is going to start getting the photos and bios, and then everything, the kind of template set up to start putting the podcasts, the videos, the blogs. And so it's coming together. There's a lot of work. We have a competition right now, a logo competition, which has been a really wonderful way to like get the whole community like actively involved and motivated and, you know, being part of it. And there's been some great submissions. We're going to, among the board and mods and content providers, take a vote on what's the best logo. And then the prize is your logo gets used on our Patristic Faith website. Nada, thank you so much. $50. What a wonderful way to end the evening. And Nada says, thank you, Father Deacon Ananias, for your steadfast work and dedication. Well, thank you, and thank again for the support. Your charitable donations really help. It's a self-sustaining ministry, so I'm able to provide the kind of content by reinvesting that. And so I really, really want to thank you for your financial contributions and support. It really does mean a lot to me. And let's see if we have any other stuff. We have 50 watching. I don't know what we're up. We've got 111 likes and 0 downvotes. The downvotes will come in. Somebody downvoted my announcing patristic faith riding on a skateboard. That's like, were you scandalized or something by a skateboard? Like, I hate skateboards. I have got a downvote. So it cracks me out. I probably know who these people are that downvote, and just nasty. But that's all right. This one's a good one. 111. 111. Oh, now it's 112. Dangerfield, thank you. We have Dangerfield and Henley were upgraded and promoted to mods. So we got 2 mods. And you know what? Let's see. Let's just, to end the night, let's make Nada a moderator for her charitable contribution and her life long support of my channel. Let's see. Looks like you guys had some great debates and discussions in the chat. And I think we've been going long enough. Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad you guys enjoyed the stream. I didn't think it was too complicated of philosophy. I think the ethics is really cool. Like, it's very approachable. And so I'll have more of those up. I'll have tons of free halves. I've got tons of them recorded, and I'm going to be giving you a lot of that. So let's just see if there's one more super chat. Is your last one that you can add, and I will take that up if anybody has. Anybody? I'm going to wait. George Journal. Let's see. George, did you send it through the Streamlabs? Let me just double check. I hope I didn't, miss anybody. I'm going to refresh. I've got Nada, Theodore, Atheist Intellectual, David G, Atheist Intellectual again, I watch YouTube, Andre V, Philip, Robert G, and Vaclav. Did I miss anybody? So sorry, George, I didn't see anything come in. What in the world? I'll refresh. Yes! Mikhail the King of Kings, $20. Thank you. I don't know if that's you, George, or, but if it is, I applaud you and thank you. And if it isn't George, I thank you anyways. George's Journal. God bless all of you. Have a blessed evening tonight. For those of you attending liturgy tomorrow, a blessed liturgy. Please pray for me, pray for my family, and God bless Montana. God bless all of you. and your families, and may Christ continue to enlighten our minds and guide us and keep us from error and all temptations. And with that, I bid you all a blessed evening. God bless, guys.